Jnanatimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lalita Shri Visakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschachati Satarine Hare Krishna. So we're about to read chapter 10, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta. It's called This Momentous Hour of Need. And if anyone wants to start us off, please go for it. You're free to unmute yourself and crack on. And we usually just read, as much as you feel comfortable reading, and then pass it on. So if anyone's feeling inspired, feel free. Okay, Hema, I'm back to Vinod Prabhu's here. Haribol, Grace.
Oh, it's going off. Wait a minute. Okay, I'll start. This momentous hour of need, our capacity of presenting the matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there may be so many literature discrepancies in spite of our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with all our faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of society will still accept this on account of its being an honest attempt for glorifying the Almighty Great, so much now badly needed. From Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Volume 1. Bhaktivedanta Swami, accompanied by some of the Kesava Mad devotees, made a short preaching tour of Agra, Kanpur, Jhansi, and Delhi. But he was soon back in his own place at the Vamsi Gopalji temple. No one called him a boy Babu any longer, even amongst his friends. It was Swamiji or Maharaj. And people often addressed him as Swami Bhaktivedanta, Swami Maharaj, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. People readily recognized him as a sadhu and offered respect. Yet his basic problems remained. He wanted to write and print, but he had no money. He wanted to broadcast the message of Godhead, but few were willing to listen. Such things hadn't been changed by his becoming a Swami. When a librarian advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to write books, they were permanent, whereas newspapers were read once and thrown away. He took it that a spiritual master was speaking through this person. Then an Indian army officer who liked Bhakti Godhead suggested the same thing. Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as a revelation from a spiritual master. As a dependent servant, constantly meditating on the desires of his transcendental master and seeking his guidance, Bhaktivedanta Swami felt his spiritual master's reciprocal blessings and personal presence. More and more, he was feeling confidential contact with Bhaktivedanta, and now he was feeling an inspiration to write books. He considered Srimad Bhagavatam because it was the most important and authoritative Vaishnava scripture. Although Bhagavad Gita was the essence of all Vedic knowledge presented in a brief ABC fashion, Srimad Bhagavatam was elaborate, and Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur had both written Bengali commentaries on Bhagavatam. In fact, most of the great Vaishnava acharyas of the past had commentated on Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya himself had recommended Srimad Bhagavatam as a spotless Vedic literature. An English translation and commentary for the book could one day change the hearts of the entire world. And if he could publish even a few books, his preaching would be enhanced. He could go abroad with confidence and not appear empty-handed. One day, Gaurachand Goswami, proprietor of the Radha Damodar temple, approached Bhaktivedanta Swami, invited him to come and live at the Radha Damodar temple. Being an eternal home of Jiva and Rupa Goswami, it would be more suitable for his writing and translating. Bhaktivedanta Swami was interested. He had never stopped his regular visits there, and he always felt inspired in the presence of the Samadhi tombs of the great leaders of Lord Chaitanya's movement, Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. But he went to look at the two available rooms. He found them in poor repair. They had not been maintained or lived in for many years. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, however, Bhaktivedanta Swami agreed to take the rooms at 5 rupees per month. He estimated that for a little more than 500 rupees, he could have electricity installed and extensive repairs made. When it was finished, he could move in. Bhaktivedanta Swami saw the invitation as auspicious, and living there would complement his new project of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam in English. All of Vrindavan's temples, Radha Damodar, had the largest collection of original writings of the 6 Goswamis and their followers. More than 2,000 separate manuscripts, many of them 300, some even 400 years old. Bhaktivedanta Swami looked forward to residing there someday and serving in the company of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami. From now, he would remain at the Vamsi Gopal temple, and wherever money he could collect, he would gradually repair the rooms. It was an important maxim, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that a preacher should go to the cities and not remain in seclusion in a holy place. So that is the spirit. Bhaktivedanta Swami continued commuting to Delhi, even though to him it was hell, and even though he had no fixed residence there. Often he was taken by businessmen who felt obliged on the basis of Indian culture. A good man, if he wanted to be favored by God, should accommodate the sadhu and give them meals and a place to stay. But the vision of such pious men was a sentimental Hinduism, and their receptions were artificial. They could not really appreciate Bhaktisiddhanta Swami's work, and Bhaktivedanta Swami was not of the mind to impose himself upon such posts.
Then he spoke with Mr. Isaran Sharman, manager of the Radha Press. In the past, Mr. Sharman had printed flyers and stationery for the League of Devotees, and Bhaktivedanta Swami had stayed in Mr. Sharman's house on occasion. Mr. Sharman introduced Bhaktivedanta Swami to Pandit Sri Krishna Sharman, a caste Brahmana and active religionist, secretary to the century-old Delhi Religious Society, Sri Navo Prem Sabha. Out of sympathy for Bhaktivedanta Swami's mystery labours, Krishna Pandit gave him a room in his Radha Krishna temple in the Chipawada neighbourhood of Old Delhi. Now Bhaktisiddhanta Swami would have a permanent office in Delhi. The train from Mathura would arrive at the old Delhi station near Chandini Chowk, the broad avenue down which poured a river of workday traffic. Rickshaws, bicycle riders, sometimes a dozen beasts, autos in lesser numbers, men running on foot pulling heavy carts and beasts of burden, donkeys, oxen, an occasional camel or elephant carrying heavy loads and being driven by men with whips in their hands. From the intensely busy Chandini Walk, Bhaktisiddhanta Swami would take the short walk to Chipawada, past the Red Fort, keeping the Gauri Sankara temple on his left, then proceeding along a side street past the large, imposing Jama Mosque. Near Chipawada, the streets would become narrow. Chipawada had been a Muslim neighborhood until the Indian-Pakistan partition of 1947, and thousands of Punjabi Hindus had settled there. Chipawada was part of a mixed Hindu-Muslim neighborhood so crowded with people that cars were not allowed to enter the streets. Only ox carts and rickshaws could penetrate the narrow, crowded lanes, and in some areas the lanes were planted with iron posts to keep rickshaws out. Even a bicycle rider would create havoc amongst the densely packed crowds of shoppers and workers who moved along the street and lanes. Side streets led to other side streets, lanes so narrow that the second floor balconies on opposite sides of the street were only inches apart, practically forming a roof over the street so that pedestrian could glimpse only the narrowest patch of sky. Private yards, shops, and alleys became almost indistinguishable from the public thoroughfares. Although most shops bore signs in Hindi with subheadings in English, some bore the curvy scripts of Arabic, and women dressed in black with veiled faces were a common sight. In the heart of this intense city life was the narrow entrance of Krishna Pandit's Radha Krishna temple, with a plaque of the demigod Ganesh and a row of nesting pigeons just above its simple arched door. The temple with its resident families retained some of the tenement atmosphere of the neighborhood. Although the temple room was dark, the Radha Krishna deities on the altar were well illuminated. Radharani was the color of cream, and Krishna was black marble, and stood about 2 feet tall. He was decorated with dots of fresh sandalwood pulp, and a mask of yellow sandalwood on his forehead. Both deities were dressed in silk garments. On the second floor, just above the deity room, was a guest room, Bhaktisiddhanta Swami's room. Its cement walls and floor were completely bare. Protruding up from the floor was a 3-foot-high concrete pyramid with a spiral, indicating that the deities were directly beneath. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami soon found that his room was not secluded, but was side by side with other residential rooms. Outside the door, a metal grating smaller than in the Vamsi Kopalaji temple, the Keshavaji math revealed the small temple courtyard below. From the roof, hardly a single tree could be seen. The view was of tenement rooftops so tightly crowded together that it seemed one could walk from roof to roof, all the way to the colossal Jama Masjid. The mosque's 3 large domes, surrounded by taller minarets, rose high above the ordinary building, attracting flocks of pigeons, which perched upon the dome or flew in wheeling patterns in the sky. Krishna Pandit, dressed in a black, lightweight cotton coat, the kind made internationally recognized by Pandit Nehru, and he had the Nehru hat also. He spoke good English and was garrulous. He was well known and respected within the neighborhood. He saw Bhaktisiddhanta Swami as God sent, a sadhu for him to take care of, and thus proved once again the piety of Hindu culture. He found his new guest likable, a simple, gentle, gracious, and accomplished Vaishnava scholar. Okay.
Hema will read a bit.
Krishna Pandit said he understood the importance of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Sanatana Dharma mission, his need for a Delhi office, and he vowed to supply his guest with whatever he required. Although Bhaktivedanta Swami was reluctant to ask for anything for himself, Krishna Pandit brought in a sitting mat and a low table, placing them before the pyramid, and also brought a mattress. He showed Bhaktivedanta Swami how to operate the room's single light, a bulb and metal shade that hung from a cord and could be raised or lowered by hand. He brought a picture of Radha and Krishna that had been given to his guru by the Maharaj of Jaipur and set it within a niche in the wall, relishing that Bhaktivedanta Swami could gaze upon it with the eyes of a true devotee. Bhaktivedanta Swami had wanted a secure place for writing books before going to the West, and Lord Krishna had provided it. Now he could work either in Vrindavan or in Delhi. Almost immediately he began back to Godhead again, serializing book excerpts from his previous manuscripts, while at the same time beginning Srimad Bhagavatam. When Krishna Pandit learned of his guest's lone struggles to produce back to Godhead, he volunteered to help with some of the business aspects of the publication. Bhaktivedanta Swami was indeed gratified by Krishna Pandit's sincere help, and in appreciation he gave him an addition to his name, Hare Bhakta Anudas, one who serves the Lord's devotee. After 6 months in Chippuwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an appreciation in the temple's guest book. I am pleased to write herein that I have come to Delhi from my HQ, Keshigat Vrindavan, purely on a spiritual mission to propagate the cult of devotional service of the Lord. I am more pleased to mention herewith that Sriman Sri Krishna Sharma Hari Bhaktanudas has provided me a suitable room for my literary activities. I am publishing an English fortnightly magazine of the name Back to Godhead from this place, and the Naval Prem Sabha, of which Sri Krishna Ji is the honorary secretary, is arranging for my daily lectures on Srimad Bhagavat. Late Pandit Jyoti Prasad Sharma, father of Sri Krishna Ji, was also known to me, and during his lifetime, whenever I used to come to Delhi, late Pandit Jyoti Prasad Ji would provide me with residential place. His good son is also following in the footprints of his noble father, and as secretary of the Naval Prem Sabha, he is doing good service in propagating Ram Nam all over the city. In neat English script, Bhaktivedanta Swami went on to write that in his opinion, temples should be used solely for educating the public in spiritual values, and that it was his personal mission to organize temples for that service. Temples are not meant for ordinary householders engaged simply in the matters of animal propensities. Those who are actually engaged in the service of the Lord Deity, the predominator of the temple, can only be allowed to remain in the temple, otherwise not. Trying to compose Srimad Bhagavatam at the Chippuwada while surrounded by sometimes noisy families with their non-devotional domestic habits had impressed upon him the importance of not using a temple as an apartment house.
Despite his plans to settle down and begin the monumental task of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami was ready to preach in other ways also. In October of 1959, he had encountered a news article in the Times of India. 2 American scientists had received the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the antiproton. According to one of the fundamental assumptions of the new theory, the article read, there may exist another world or an anti-world built up of antimatter. The other world reminded Bhaktivedanta Swami of the eternal spiritual world described in Bhagavad Gita. He was well aware that the scientists were not speaking of anti-material in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using their scientific terms to capture the interest of scientific-minded people. He conceived of an essay presenting the theistic science of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the anti-material particle and the anti-material world. It was a time when the whole world was talking of space travel. Indian news media had reported the Russian Sputnik 2 years ago, and the race for space had begun. Seizing on the current interest in space travel, Bhaktivedanta Swami described how by bhakti yoga the soul can travel past the farthest reaches of space to the eternal planets of the spiritual world, where life is blissful and full of knowledge. He gave his own fresh translations of Bhagavad Gita verses, couched in the language of the new physics, with its anti-material particle and anti-material world. The complete work, Easy Journey to Other Planets, was a 15,000-word manuscript, and he showed it to Hitsaran Sharma of Radha Press. But he didn't have enough money to get the little book printed. In February of 1960, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to print it himself in 2 installments of Back to Godhead. The articles drew an immediate response from a physicist at the Gujarat University in Ahmedabad, Mr. Y.G. Naik, who received Back to Godhead through the mail. Dr. Naik thought Bhaktivedanta Swami's application of the anti-material principle was really a grand one. This is no doubt a classic essay. Dr. Naik was interested in further discussion on physics and transcendental knowledge, and Bhaktivedanta Swami replied with equal enthusiasm, finally asking the physicist to join him in distributing the cultural heritage of India to the whole world. Hare Krishna.
Convinced that such an essay had a great political potential to interest educated English-speaking readers, Bhaktivedanta Swami worked hard to raise enough from donations to print Easy Journey to Other Planets as a paperback book. He finally did so in the fall of 1960. A foreword by Dr. N.K. Siddhanta, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Delhi, arrived late but was included in the book as an insert. While everyone may gain from it, the student community in particular is recommended to read the book with care and practice bhakti yoga, which will help to strengthen the mind and build up character. I shall be glad to see this work read by the students and the teachers alike. Several Indian scientists and scholars contributed reviews noting the book's scientific cum spiritual vision and the method of speeding over space, not by mechanical acceleration of speed, but through psychological effort and spiritual emancipation. It was only 38 pages, but it was his first publication aside from the one-page folded newspaper Back to Godhead. He tried to distribute the little book effectively. He gave one copy to Dr. P. Banerjee of the National Museum of New Delhi. Banerjee. He used to come to the library and consult some books, and I met him there. He gave me a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. He gave some copies to distribute for a rupee or half a rupee each. I felt attracted to him. I thought he was a saintly person with pure devotion and without any outward glamour. He was not out to attract people just for name and fame. He had little support for anybody. He had little support from anybody. He was living alone in a small room in Chipawada. He was devoted to his studies. So I asked him, "Sir, if you have time and you don't mind coming to my house, could you kindly come on Sunday and recite the Bhagavat in my house?" He readily agreed. He was a good scholar. He was learned in the scriptures and he was fond of communicating his ideas to others. He was a good speaker and a good conversationalist. He was very polite. Whatever he said very distinctly. He spoke in Bengali and explained the essence of the verses. Sometimes he also referred to the commentaries just to give me more information. Others were not very much interested in commentary or in difficult aspects, but because he knew I had some studies in the field, he explained the commentaries for my sake and for the sake of one or two other gentlemen who were also very elderly and very scholarly. Gatherings at my house would be attended by 20 or 30 people. He would continue his explanations for 1 or 2 hours. And he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra, and we would also take part with the cartels and harmonium. So it was a very enjoyable gathering because he made the difficult things very easy and he explained everything to all of us according to our needs. He knew that this much is for this person and this much is intended for this man, this much for the others.
After the meetings, he used to take a little rest in my house. I requested him to take meals in my house, but he said he did not take meals prepared by others. But when he met my wife and she said she would be happy to prepare the meals, he said, "All right, I will take." And she used to prepare meals on Sundays when he would come. He sometimes asked me how to get more and more people attracted towards this field. But as a government worker, I could not persuade anyone very openly, nor had I the time to organize anything on a big scale for him. But he was not satisfied with that. He asked me if I could organize on a bigger scale. He knew that the people who attended the meetings at my house were very old, 70, 80, almost 90 years of age, retired, educated persons. It lasted for no less than a year. After that, he said he would be trying to go out to other places. He asked me to continue the gatherings, but I said, "I'm not initiated." He said I could continue anyway because I was born as a Brahmana. He gave me the authority to continue for some time, but I could not continue because I used to go out. I lost all interest after he left. I was a government servant. Easy Journey to Other Planets had been like a warm-up for his real work of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam. But now he was even more convinced of the need for books. To preach, he would have to have books, especially if he were to go to the West. With books, he could create a spiritual revolution. There was so much literature in the West, but Westerners had nothing like this, nothing to fill their spiritual vacuum. Although he wanted to give as much time as possible to Srimad Bhagavatam, he decided to continue with Back to Godhead by using excerpts from already existing book manuscripts as articles. Occasionally, however, he would write and print a new article. In Relevant Inquiries, he wrote, "We are just trying to make a humble attempt to save the human being by propaganda of Back to Godhead. This propaganda is not fictitious. If there is any reality at all, this propaganda of Back to Godhead is the beginning of that era of reality." In a Godless Civilization, Bhaktivedanta Swami referred to Prime Minister Nehru's complaints about the misuse of public funds in the name of religion. Bhaktivedanta Swami noted that although there were undoubtedly instances in which religious leaders were implicated in criminal offences, if statistics were compared, the religious cheaters would be outnumbered by the political cheaters. Although Pandit Nehru had been right in warning of religious fraud, the warning could not be effective without a thorough reform of spiritual institutions, and that reform could be accomplished only with the cooperation of government leaders. Bhaktivedanta Swami quoted from his letter in which he had asked Prime Minister Nehru to take up study of Bhagavad Gita, but as he informed his Back to Godhead readers, Pandit Nehru had never replied. Because of his lack of spiritual knowledge, he thought that his institution, the League of Devotees, might be something like so many mats and temples which have become the source of headache for the Pandit. Bhaktivedanta Swami charged that Pandit Nehru thought that any spiritual organisation is a dungeon for accumulating public funds and then misuse it for questionable purposes. He, however, approves of the so-called sadhus who do social service and talk nonsense in the spiritual science. This is so because he has no depth of spiritual knowledge for himself, although he is Brahmin and Pandit. Ignorance and spiritual knowledge is the qualification of the Sudras, or the working class. He requested Pandit Nehru not to be afraid of the word God or Krishna, but we can assure him that there is no such cause of fear, because Krishna is everyone's friend and able to render real help to everyone. Bhaktivedanta Swami ended by suggesting that immoral practices were not confined only to the temples of India, but were common to materialistic civilizations all over the world. In particular, he cited the disturbances amongst youth that were becoming rampant in the 1960s. The best thing will be for the physician to heal himself first, because in godless civilization, while the occupants of the mats and temples have been the cause of headache for the pandit, the same thing under a different label has become the cause of headache for other European and Asian statesmen. The unbridled youngsters of those countries under the name of teddy boys in England, the rebels without cause in America, and the half-strong in Germany, the leather jackets in Sweden, the children of the sun in Japan, and style boys in USSR are some of the byproducts of a godless civilization. And that is the root cause of all headache that requires a thorough treatment. Stop there.
Hare Krishna, I think that's a good place to pause, actually. If anybody wants to share any comments or reflections, that would be great. Thanks everyone for reading, by the way. So nice. Great to hear Brandon's voice. It's really sweet. Thank you. It's great to hear everyone's voice. But yeah, thanks. I think so. Brandon and everybody, and Radha Priya and Cicely are in Bath. Bhaktivinoda Prabhu and Palika are in Scotland. Mahamanta Prabhu's in Derby.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, bridging the gap. So this is like nationwide ecstasy. Yeah, so just thought I'd say that in case, because we didn't all know where each other are. But yeah, if anyone's got any comments or reflections or anything like that. We're very lucky that Radha Priya is here because she's was initiated by Srila Prabhupada. So she's, yeah, good person to ask if we have any particular questions. Yeah.
Could you guys explain what was just said in the book we just read about Prabhupada talking about, was it Nehru? And he was saying that bad things happen everywhere. It's not just within the it just not just within the temples. What was that? It kind of went over my head. What was that point?
So I think as far as I understood it, so the Pandit, so Nehru, the Prime Minister, was saying that so many public funds get diverted towards religious or spiritual causes and they just get misused. So he was kind of criticizing that and saying, actually, he's basically saying that he's talking down about, spiritual people and sadhus, and sort of implying that, we shouldn't really be funding and that kind of activity because it's so corrupt. And so Prabhupada's response, which was typically bold and straight talking, was especially when you bear in mind, like I think Satsarup Maharaj, who wrote this book, sort of made it clear that although he's taken sannyas by now, he's kind of still a bit of a nobody. He doesn't have any great status in society or anything, yet he's still just really confident speaking out. He's not some big shot. So then Prabhupada pointed out, and maybe I've misunderstood it, but what I got was he says, well, if you actually add it all up, there's more corrupt politicians than there are corrupt religious leaders. So he's basically saying, if you want to ban something, let's ban politics. He's like that, and so he's saying, and then, I mean, that bit underneath, he approves of so-called sadhus who do social service and talk nonsense in the spiritual science because he has no depth of spiritual knowledge for himself. So he sort of called him out and he said, well, you don't really understand what you're talking about, despite supporting so many different types of people. Which, I mean, as we've gone through in previous chapters, we're hearing a lot from Prabhupada's like Back to Godhead articles and things like that. and he's like such a straight talker. He's really not pulling any punches with anyone, you know. He just, because he's got obviously total faith that what he's saying is correct, and he's protected by Krishna for doing that service, and he's just repeating what his own spiritual master said. So yeah, that's how I understand it. Hopefully that's okay. Yeah,
That really helped. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to make that point too. That's what I noticed in the reading as well. Bhaktivedanta Swami ended by suggesting that moral practices are not confined only to the temples of India, because, you know, it's like in ISKCON as well. It's like things go on, but they go on a lot worse outside of ISKCON. You know, it's like we're kind of, you know, as compared to the damage that's been done to the world, it's like ISKCON isn't really, you know, up there in that sort of league. You know, it's like I noticed that myself. It's like, yeah, because people have a go, and you know, I've got my gripes myself, and you know, even our leaders will speak out about and things like that about, what's wrong in ISKCON, let's try and correct it and things. But, you know, things go on a lot worse outside, you know, and, you know, I feel myself, I've learned, you know, I've learned a lot of good in ISKCON, an awful lot of good, you know, an awful lot. You know, I've picked up some things that aren't so good as well. So, you know, I think we can improve on that, you know, but that's a kind of group, I suppose, therapy to improve on the things that aren't right, you know, that, you know, we may pick up in ISKCON, you know, that, but I noticed that myself. I was going to make a comment on that myself, because that's a thing, you know, that I think about, you know, we don't bomb people, and we don't, you know, we don't do like, you know, sort of big time, you know, things like that, you know, and whereas materialists, you know, in a war, they just kind of make excuses for it and try and, you know, apologize, and it has to be done, you know, and it's like, well, wait a minute, you know, it's like, there's no need for that. We can, you know, we can do things another way, you know.
I was. Sorry, Prabhu.
Yeah, it's just, I was thinking of that line myself when he made that comment. So
yeah, I was. I remember talking to a Catholic friend of mine a while ago, and he was. Prabhupada uses that aphorism that you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. So if you know, if you're wondering what the tree is and an apple comes off it, you can be pretty sure it's an apple tree. So when you're in ISKCON and you spend time with the people that are in it, like, because we're in Kali Yuga, of course there's so many things going on, but actually you don't have to look very far in ISKCON to find like some amazing people, you know, really incredible souls, like, really like, wow, how, and when you speak to them, like, I know that's particularly with our Guru Maharaj, but with so many other Prabhupada's disciples, they'll say, well, 50 years ago, I wasn't like this. You know, it was Prabhupada that did it. Prabhupada made me, and they've followed very strictly, and they've stuck to the program through thick and thin, and some very difficult, turbulent times, you know, and whatever. But yeah, you see, actually, when I often think that people criticize, sometimes we're at the university and people talk about, religious institutions, they spend so much money. And I look at a university and I think, well, one university is like, it's so much bigger than a cathedral or a temple. It's like, for a university is like a town in its own right. It has pubs and shops and halls of residence, and I think they're spending so much money on that. How can they criticize what we're doing? So yeah, it's like, and what Prabhupada's done is so far out, you know, and what he keeps doing is just incredible. You know, the change. Yeah. Thank you for that, Prabhu. I don't know if Palika, our mantra, anybody else had anything they wanted to share? Or, yeah.
I was just thinking how what we're reading at the moment. I'm not used to reading things on the screen, so I didn't read. But there's the tradition. He's speaking about the tradition to invite a holy man to your home, for the householders to do that. Invite the holy man and feed the the sadhu, and you'll get benefit from doing that. So that's a tradition in India, and also that people should give to temples and then they get pious credits. So it's understandable that within that tradition, then you'll get people, human nature creeps in wherever there are human beings, and somebody will pose as a spiritual organization or a sadhu in order to get the benefits, so he's dealing with that culture in the chapters that are being read at the moment, and he'd also say that in India their spiritual wisdom is very near the surface. Just scratch a bit and it's there. It's just covered over by taking it too lightly over the generations, whereas in the West he really had to work to build up something from generations of forgetfulness. So it's a different culture that's being described.
Thank you so much. I was thinking the other day like that the ISKCON, we have things like house programs, and the Maharaj is coming to your house, and I always think of it in terms of like we have our own sort of culture in ISKCON sort of thing, but actually it's coming from, it's an eternal culture actually that Prabhupada's actually he's given it to us, encased us in it. Thank you. Hare Krishna. I don't know if anyone else, my mantra Prabhu or Palika or anyone else, please enlighten us. Okay, wonderful. I think that's us. So thanks everybody, and Hare Krishna. It's we'll pick it up again next week, and usually, if anyone has any sort of reflections or whatever there's the Facebook group is there, and sometimes we share little bits and bobs that we find about Prabhupada in the Facebook group. So there's always that space there, and we'll pick it up again next week and finish the chapter off. The Momentous Hour of Need. It's I love the chapter titles. It's so enticing. It really whets your appetite for hearing about it. So thanks very much everyone.
It was very nice reading this evening. I enjoyed reading this evening. I was kind of like, I felt a bit while I was reading, because it's like spiritual matter we're reading, it's like, I kind of felt, I felt like, sort of spiritual emotion reading it, you know what I mean? Just reading about Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami, it was really nice, honestly. It was like nice just to feel something in my heart, it was like, it was so nice, honestly. It was nice. I thought I would read first just to try and please the devotees, try and set a bit of example, but it was so nice for me, it was like, God, I'm not a machine, I'm not a robot, I'm not just, rules and regulations man that's, anti every rule in the book, it was just nice to read and feel some kind of you know, some like nice spiritual emotion for Prabhupada and Rupa Swami. And it's such a touching story, isn't it? I mean, who's not touched by Prabhupada's story, right? I mean, is anyone in ISKCON not touched by Prabhupada's story? They're not really in ISKCON if they're not, you know. They're not really in ISKCON. ISKCON's a state of consciousness, isn't it? It's not like a square block that, you know, certain people are in, you know. So it was just nice to read. So thanks very much for starting the group and giving me the opportunity. It was just so nice. It was a bit of a release, you know, a bit of a, I've been looking for some kind of release, you know, for what's inside me, for, you know, how can I do it? I've got to have some release. I've got to have, you know, will I do it by talks online? Will I do it this way and that way? And I felt, you know, it was just nice reading that, and I felt some release from my heart, you know, from me, you know. So I just thought I'd share that before we all say good night.
Thank you so much. You know what? Just on that subject, really quickly, I was just that bit, the first bit that you read from the start of Bhagavatam, where Prabhupada says, I mean, I'm paraphrasing it probably, but he basically says, you know, we might get it wrong and make mistakes, but because the spirit of it is there, you know,
yeah.
And I feel like I'm trying to read it, and I'm trying to make sure I don't get any of the words mixed up, because I know Satsarup Maharaj tried so hard to write this nice one. But the more time we spend reading together, the more I just feel like it really is not that important. The vibe, the mood, the atmosphere is so nice that it's coming through. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Boo. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for reading and listening. Even if you didn't read it, it's not important. It's just nice that we're all here together, isn't it? So yeah,
one of the best parts of our week.
Yeah, it's real nectar, and even sometimes, you know, it's easy to underestimate how powerful it is, isn't it? So
we're associating with Prabhupada each week.
Yeah, it's really, really nice. So yeah, thanks everybody so much, and sorry that we can't just do it for like 24 hours. I'd love it if we could just hear this and talk about it forever, but you know, we've got things to do for Prabhupada and so many others. So yeah, we'll do it again in a week, Krishna willing. So yeah.
Next week.
Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Sadhu Sangha ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanande.